So one day when I was in my meditation, these three words were laid on my heart. And the funny thing about it was, I knew instantly the message of these three words on my heart. It kind of came to me in the way that music does. And I talk about this a lot when I'm talking about music, is that I feel like I've always been a conduit because I would just hear lyric and melody. And I always reference looking up because I felt like it would come up and come down through me. But I would always hear melodies and music. And so when these words were laid on my heart, that was not as much a surprise to me, but I knew it was different. And I actually knew the message of those three words were that if I would focus on God, gratitude, and giving daily, that ultimately I would get rid of most of the fear and anxiety that I simply filled my days at that time.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. Today we have Melissa, who is a published author, professional songwriter of 20 plus years. Melissa Bollea Rowe is the CEO of a music publishing and artist development company called Rhymes Partner. And she recently has her new book publication called God, Gratitude, and Giving, which released in May. And we're excited to have this conversation and find out more about Melissa Bollea Rowe. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here today.
I am so glad you are here. We're going to be talking a little bit about your life. The book primarily will be the focus of our conversation, and that will give us a direction as to how it is you turned out to be who you are now as a songwriter and now CEO of this company as well. But first off, let me ask you a little bit about your life. You were talking about where you are now, right now, as we're recording, but tell us where you live and about your family life too.
So I grew up in Florida, Tampa Bay, Clearwater area, and lived there my whole life until I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, about 17 years ago to finally pursue my dream of songwriting. And the reason I say finally is because I was in my 30s by the time I got out there, and that's a whole story. But, well, about 7 years ago, I reconnected with my childhood sweetheart, and we got married. And he has his careers in California, and so he had 5 acres out there, and my career was in Nashville, and so we commuted a lot. And then we're both from Florida and decided that we ultimately wanted to get back to Florida. So a few years ago, we bought our dream home on the beach in Florida, and now we split our time and work remotely between Nashville, Florida, and California. I know it's a lot.
That's amazing. Now, I want to ask about this whole childhood sweetheart reconnecting there. Like, I'm such a nosy. That's why I'm a podcaster. I'm nosy. I want to know about connecting with your childhood sweetheart.
Well, really, it's really a great story. I mean, literally, we were in those wonder years. I met my now husband Sean when I was in the seventh grade. We were in middle school. First boyfriend, first little butterflies and first little kiss and all that stuff. But I mean, we were very young, of course, and so as the years went on, and we ultimately ended up going to different schools, and life happened, and we tried to stay connected. But this was not in the air. This was not what back and then. We did not have cell phones and ways of connecting like the kids do now, or staying connected. It was just a phone number, and maybe at that time some what were they called, pagers,
It was a text, but yeah, with the pager, you
Yeah,
could
with
put a
like a
phone number on
pager,
it. Yeah.
but we didn't even have those because we were too young to have those. The older kids or the parents had those. So anyway, ultimately, throughout the years, we stayed in touch as friends. We both moved on with our lives, and then we reconnected again when we were in our early 20s. But at that time, he had gotten married and I was married, and we were just the best of friends. I think we always knew that there was a deep connection with each other, but we were married. And so, once again, life just kind of moved on. And then it was 20 some odd years later, and we were both single. He had reached out to me just randomly to wish me a happy birthday, and I hadn't spoken to him in many, many, many years, lots of years. And from that moment on, we reconnected and we got married. So, hi,
I
it's
love it. My cheeks hurt from smiling right now. I can it's like feeling all that beautiful love and excitement, and it's just awesome. So glad that you had this beautiful love story.
Yes, it definitely is. And I don't think that either one of us, I mean, somewhere deep in our hearts, I mean, maybe we knew, but we didn't really know. I mean, after so many years, we just maybe had resolved to, well, that's their life and this is my life. But it's just so we're so happy that it turned out this way. And it's been this October, we'll celebrate 7 years. And
That's
so it's,
wonderful.
yeah, it's
Well,
super
well,
exciting.
congratulations, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about the book. So it launched in May.
Yes.
And this book will kind of lead us then into then what it is you do now, because the book is part memoir, correct, about your life? Does it have, is it
Yeah,
part
well,
memoir?
I would say that because I definitely share not just insights and ways that those words powerfully changed my life, but I do share some very personal examples of things that happened in my life. So, yes.
Yeah, and then that's part of the reason that I was contacted to have you on the podcast, partly because of the title of your book being God, Gratitude, and Giving, and the other part is you experienced loss at a really young age. You lost both your parents.
Yes.
So, how old were you? And then we will talk about the three words in your book.
I should probably say there's just really, we could talk about so many things. I should probably back up a little bit and say
Please.
that when you were asking me about the story of my now husband Sean and I've actually contributed a chapter in a book that's going to be coming out at the end of the year called The Cinderella Monologues, and I actually tell our story in that book in a chapter called We Were 12. So there's a lot of more details, and there's actually some loss and a lot of grief and things that happened in those years. I know I was kind of surmising it, but I just wanted to say that because there is a lot more to our story that's pretty fantastic. But in terms of God, gratitude, and giving and my story, yes, I lost both my parents when I was little. My mother, sadly, tragically, to a jealous boyfriend who took her life, killed her, and my father to suicide. So, I, without diminishing my story or anyone else's story, I just like to say that, especially having listened to some of your other guests on your podcast, I know that to a large degree, we all have our stories, and we all, suffer some type of grief in our life, and it's just part of it. When somebody says, "Oh, you've had a sad life," I'd like to say, "No, no, no, I've had a life." I guess it would be who defines what our life is supposed to be, because so many of us maybe if you're fortunate and you don't suffer any grief, that's a little different, and you're just fortunate. But so yes, so I moved around a lot when I was little, from grandparents to aunts and uncles. There were three of us kids, and so it became a little difficult for us, for family even, to take on three kids. And
That's
so
what I was going to ask. Did they keep you guys together? Did they try to keep you guys together as you were moving?
we did. At first, we stayed together, but then we were separated for those reasons. I know it was hard. And I mentioned this in my book that I do ache for that part of my lost childhood with my siblings on top of it, because we were separated. And so each of us in that went through our own different types of sufferings on that side of it too. So yeah, we were separated. And so, it was really rough. So I very one of the things I'm the most proud of in terms of what I've been able to accomplish in my life is that I very organically found my way to living out my dream and what it is who I authentically am. I know that there are people I've spoken to who tried their entire lives or not even known, what they were meant to do or unsure about it in their life or, have regret about not getting there. So I feel very, very blessed to have recognized early on that lyric and melody was something that I just heard. And so, how all of this wraps into my book was that along the way, there was a lot of suffering and there was a lot of discovery. There was a lot of anxiety, there was depression. And even when I uprooted and moved to Nashville, I had doubts and there were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this is harder than I thought. Or am I really cut out to do this? All those doubtful things that enter into your mind, no matter what you're attempting to do, if it's
Hmm.
scary. And so, one of the things that was always important to me was my faith. And if there was one thing I was a little nervous about being completely transparent with this book was the word God. I thought, well, I want to be as authentic as possible as how this happened and why these three words. But I thought, well, people are really going to come for me, with that word God. But so I quickly explained to people, and this is just the truth. For me, where I connect with God is in silence, and where I sense that oneness and that where I can sort a lot of things out is for me in silence. And so for that reason, I focus a lot in chapter 1, God, on silence and what that means to me and how I got there. And a lot of people can interpret that as meditation, or for me, I talk about, just being still, not using music or anything to get me there. Although if that's what other people do, that's fine. I've done sound therapy in the past, but for me it's just finding that place of being still, and that can be a process. It took me a long time before I can try to even quiet my inner dialogue or not be distracted by the sounds outside or suddenly get quiet and remember, oh, I remember something I had to do and want to jump up and write it down. So it's a process, and I talk about that. But the most important thing is when you can get there, it's a very healing place. It's a place where things that maybe didn't seem clear suddenly become clear. And I talk about those things that you committed to when your inner being was saying, absolutely not, there's no time for that. But so I get a lot of clarity in silence and my time with God. I do that daily, and I also the gratitude and the giving. So these two things, the essence and the message of my book is essentially not just talking about these three words, but how I incorporated them daily. So back then, when I began to incorporate those three things daily and what they meant to me, I was able to, over a period of time, move myself out of depression, anxiety, fear, into a place of so much manifestation, so much joy, so much living, so much good energy that I knew eventually when the time was right, I wanted to share that with people. And I can't say 100% that I guess I did choose this time, but it also happened to line up with a time where there's just so much going on in our world. And so what I hope is that, my book is just a pause for people, or a reminder of things that maybe, for years people have talked about gratitude, but have we really soaked it in to the point that we understand the magnitude of what being grateful does? And so I hope that people won't just be like, oh, another book about gratitude, but yet maybe this would be the time that something would really click and they would really understand what shift can change in your life when you focus on being grateful in combination with the other things.
And then with giving, with that part. So God, gratitude, and giving. So you mentioned then silence is how you connect with God, and that is one of your things. With gratitude, then just give us just a snippet at what your gratitude practice looks like.
Sure. So, a few years into my move to Nashville, things got really, really tough for me. And I had, before I moved to Nashville, I would do anything. So, Nashville is the music city mecca, and I was living in Florida, and I was trying to immerse myself into music any way that I could, whether that was singing at the local fairs or writing music on my own. And I would do some writing for public television, stuff like that. I was also on my worship team at my church in Florida, which was a non denominational church. I was very comfortable there and I sang on my worship team. And for me, I wanted to be as close to the music as possible. And so I loved that space and time in my life when I was on my worship team, and I could feel like I could be a part of music before I actually moved to Tennessee and could do it more full time in that type of situation. But when I got to Tennessee, I didn't really know too many people. I had cultivated some relationships, but truly it was all just new to me. And so I didn't have a home church or a space or a place that I felt like I could get that part of my soul fulfilled. So, but what I did do is something I'd always done, which is my quiet time, my silence, my meditation with God. So I just started diving into that a little bit more often since I didn't have a church and I didn't, I wasn't in that type of situation. So one day when I was in my meditation, these three words were laid on my heart. And the funny thing about it was, I knew instantly the message of these three words on my heart. It kind of came to me in the way that music does. And I talk about this a lot when I'm talking about music, is that I feel like I've always been a conduit because I would just hear lyric and melody. And I always reference looking up because I felt like it would come up and come down through me. But I would always hear melodies and music. And so when these words were laid on my heart, that was not as much a surprise to me, but I knew it was different. And I actually knew the message of those three words were that if I would focus on God, gratitude, and giving daily, that ultimately I would get rid of most of the fear and anxiety that I simply filled my days at that time. I knew that the God part for me was my silence and my meditation because that's where it came to me. And gratitude was something that I think I had incorporated that in my life at that time, but not to the point that I learned to. And I'm glad you asked me about that because I'm really excited to talk about that. I go into it in my book, but I'm very excited to share that here with you and your listeners. And so giving, and at the time it was funny because I remember zeroing in on the word giving because I remember initially thinking, oh gosh, of all things, I'm flat broke, I'm struggling right now, so how am I going to give every single day? But it was just such a neat process because very quickly, just like with gratitude, I realized that there were so many ways to give. Some of it, yes, were monetary, but other things were not. And so you would be amazed. So let's go to the gratitude. So
Yes.
most of the time, when we think about gratitude, we think of kind of like the obvious things, right? I'm grateful for my home and I'm grateful for my husband and I'm grateful for my kids and blah blah. But what gets really good and really gets your mind busy and almost you can't, I mean, whether you initially start out, yeah, writing some things down. I'm to the point now because it's been so many years that I do go through it in my mind. And if I feel like journaling, I do. And by the way, I added journal pages in my book for that reason.
Oh, awesome.
So I know if anyone's like me, when you're reading a book, sometimes, you read something you want to retain, you grab a pen, you maybe highlight it or you write it on the side of the book. So I wanted my readers to have a place to jot down some of their own thoughts. And as they were reading my book or things that they were grateful for. When it may take some practice, like everything does, but you get to the point where you start being grateful for the things, that you don't necessarily come to the forefront of your mind. For example, I am so grateful for the skill and the technology that we're able to get on Zoom today and we're able to communicate. And I'm super grateful that, we didn't have a power outage or a Wi-Fi problem or a disconnection. I'm grateful when I go to the grocery store for the girl or the guy that got up that day and decided to come into work to just make it possible for me to be able to go through the checkout line. And so, I am grateful for my toothbrush. I am grateful for the recipe I discovered yesterday on TikTok that I'm so excited to. You can kind of see that really it's endless. It is
Hmm.
endless. And I guess if you are so busy doing that, not only does this really miraculous thing happen where you are so grateful. We live in this world that it's like an exchange. It really is true. It's like an energy exchange.
Mhm.
So the more grateful you are, the more things come into your life to be grateful. And it can absolutely be overwhelming. And this is a true story, but at one point years ago, when I began practicing the act of gratitude and my life was beginning to really shift, I remember a day where I was just in silence with God, and I said, it gets me really emotional to even think about this because it was so real. Where I said, God, slow down, because with all the things that you're bringing in my life and you're giving me, because I can't catch up. I can't thank you. Like, I'm spending my day saying thank you and being grateful, but I slow down. And really it was a product of how much gratitude I was having that was bringing more things into my life. So there's a place in my book where I say, if we understood the capacity of what how being grateful shifts in our life, we would start doing it every day. But I
Mhm.
do think there is a certain, even myself, like, we see it everywhere we go. We see it in all these little stores, be grateful, or things on the wall. But I was hoping that maybe in my book, we would take a look at that word again a little deeper.
How do we stay in that attitude of gratitude in moments of hardship, in moments of those tests? And how do we even see those tests as something that we can be grateful for, even in that process of going through that?
I think it's important for us to always remain human and know
Mhm.
that there are going to be things that we're going to go through daily, and it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be perfection, 24 hours a day in terms of being grateful. I think it's healthy to feel things and to have moments of doubt. I mean, I still do.
I
As much as I
agree.
have this practice down, I still go through things where I have to remind myself, but I think it's really healthy to feel what you're going through, and that in itself to say, okay, if in that moment you can't find gratitude for it, no, because we've all lived that. We know that later something, will be shown to us. There will be a light or a reason or something that came out of whatever we went through. So there's a lot of trust that goes into that, because I can tell you right now, something horrific happens today, I'm not going to instantly be like, well, I need to find a reason to be grateful. No, I'm going to be in that moment. I'm going to exist in that moment. But I think I'm going to ultimately get back to the practice of, because the alternative is what? To stay in that grieving place and create more grief, or just as, and I'll see if I can articulate this well, but when we fall down and we scrape our knee, over the next couple of days we can visibly see that our knee is beginning to heal, right? But I think our emotions are like that too. I mean, when something comes at us, the only difference is we can't physically see, but I think that the way that we're designed is that our emotions are meant to heal also, and so they take time too. So we can't be so hard on ourselves to say, well, I read Melissa's book and I know that I should be, grateful. Well, you should also be human and you should also feel those things. And maybe it's just, an idea of getting back on that course when you can, because that's probably going to be ultimately the healthier approach. And it takes practice. We have to remind
Mhm.
ourselves that we can choose to how something will affect us. I mean, if someone says to you, you know, you're ugly. I know this isn't a weird example, but if someone says you're ugly, well, the reality is that we would think most 99% of people would say that's insulting and I should be angry. But the truth of the matter is, it's a choice to be offended by that. It's absolutely a choice to be offended. In that moment, if you understand you have a choice, you can just laugh it off and say, well, you're not so cute yourself, you know? So in the reality that words and things, they can affect us, but I think bigger than that is the reminder that we have choices.
the part of us being human, like you mentioned before, not being so hard on ourselves when we do have those emotions and are like, but wait, I should know what to do. I've already been through hardships before. I already know that gratitude, I have this slogan. I created a t-shirt like gratitude flips the switch. When we're in the middle of it, you're not going to be thinking of that right in that moment, right? You're going to be feeling the the grief, the sadness, the whatever emotion, if you scraped your knee, the pain, and that's okay. But knowing that you have these tools that you've worked through in the process, like if you've already developed a gratitude practice, then as you start healing a little more and your knee starts creating that scab back again, you could be like, okay, I am grateful that it didn't leave that much of a scar where we know where it was, or something else that you can come up with.
I love that you said that that is your slogan, gratitude flips the switch. It really does. And like other things, I mean, even if I were to make the analogy or the comparison of weight loss, if it's difficult, right? Because if you decide, okay, well, I'm going to start, eating healthier, it takes a couple of days or a couple of weeks for you to really look and for you to notice or see the results, and you've lost 4 or 5 pounds. So think of it the same way. It takes time. And so maybe sit through the uncomfortableness of what it's like trying to get still, because it's just something that we don't, or the uncomfortableness of really don't be embarrassed of like, well, I can't think of all these things to be grateful for. Well, eventually you will, and you'll get really good at it, but just be gentle with yourself in the process. There's times in the past where I would hear something profound and I would think, oh, I really like that. But unless I practiced that a few times, it just remained something, profound. I mean, back in the day, they invented flashcards for children because they figured out that they needed to see things more than one time. So that is probably, yes, the bigger point here is that be kind to yourself and take the time when it gets really good. When you ultimately get good at it, that's when the excitement that I have in my voice and the things that I talk about in my book and the life that I'm living right now compared to where I was. I mean, I just attribute it all to that. I
To the
really do.
gratitude, to the God, gratitude, and giving. Now let's talk about giving. You were
Yes.
mentioning about the part of becoming really creative of how it is we give, that it's not always the aspect of monetary giving of your time, giving of your talents as well, giving. So tell us different ways in which Melissa was
Yeah.
creative with the giving.
Well, thank you. And so, side note, in the
Yeah.
back of my book is my email address because I get so excited about talking about this and the ways that I came up with the creativity and the giving, that I want to know when people, if they decide to incorporate these things, I want to hear from them. I want to know in what ways they did. I want them to share their excitement. I want to know about the changes that occurred in their life. So my email is in the back of the book because I do want to hear from people. But giving. So one of my favorite things to do, and it's kind of funny, I joke about this a lot, is I would love to give a silent prayer to a stranger. And and it didn't have to be someone who visibly was struggling or in a wheelchair or had something physical or visible. I would maybe see someone who was perfectly wonderful reading a book in a park, and I would send them a silent prayer. And I don't know, for whatever reason, that was just life energy to me. And I enjoyed doing that. And I joke a lot about how, you have to be careful sometimes not to stare at people because the last thing someone's thinking is that, oh, she must be sending me a prayer right now. But how wonderful is it that to not even know that a perfect stranger you'll just never know saw you and sent you a blessing, because I believe energy is real. So first and foremost, you can do things like that. You can smile at people. I think, I mean, I joke in my book too that I'm not the smile police, and by no means do you need to smile at everybody. But I do notice lots of opportunities for somebody to smile where we're just caught up in our own space. And I say this in my book too, that I'm not going to go dig up the science behind what happens in our bodies when we smile or we feel good, but I know it's real and I know the scientific evidence is out there. So you can simply smile more and you can give people a smile, and you don't even know how you won't, you may never know how that one little act was something that maybe they needed in their day. It's just a stranger smiled at them and just for whatever reason gave them a little bit of hope for whatever they're going through. There are obvious ways to give. I mean, like, you can't solve the problems of the world unless you're just a billionaire and you can do it financially. But I could have a friend that maybe got into a car accident or had some kind of financial hardship, and I may not be able to help her out that. But what I can do right from my phone is send her a 10 or 5 or $25 gift card to Starbucks and say, hey, I know things are tough. Go have a few cups of coffee on me. And these days, there's a lot of different apps where you can send gifts, and I love it. There's one called Goodies, and I use it.
And this is not a paid partnership with
This is
Goodies,
not a
but
paid
this is not
partnership.
a paid partnership. This is just something she loves.
Yeah, this is just something that I
And
love.
Starbucks either. They're not paying us to tell them, give them more publicity. Go ahead.
No, we're
So
not,
Goodies.
but
Tell
you
us about Goodies. Tell us about Goodies.
well, I love the Goodies app. So if any of you have ever used it, oh gosh, I love this app.
I haven't.
Okay. So one of the wonderful things about it is that you can send somebody a gift, and there's multiple, categories. You could send them birthday, anniversary, just wedding, just a whatever, right? And so what they have to do is they have to actually open it on their phone, and they make it fun. They make it like, oh, confetti and all that, but they actually can exchange the gift if there's something else that they'd rather have
Oh,
within that same, and I've had people exchange and, say like, hey, Mel, I've got 10 pairs of earpods, but what I'd really love is this, or they just exchange it, and I'm not offended at all by it. I'm happy to know that they got something that they wanted. So they can exchange it, they can accept it. And the good thing about that is when they accept it, they put in the address they want it to go to so that there's no mistake. I love that, actually. I love that. And at that point, when they do that, then it bills me on my card. So you actually never kind of get in that, well, I sent you a gift and it never showed up. Oh, bummer. Or, I darn it, I paid for that and it went to the wrong whatever. So their process makes it to where they get that gift.
and they get exactly what they want. But then it gives the option if you want to swap that for something else of that same value that you were going to get, they can.
The most common thing, Kendra, is like I'll send somebody like homemade, like not homemade, but these baked
Cookies.
cookies, yes.
Yummy.
And they might be like, Mel, I don't like walnuts, but I just love pecans. And so I got the, and I'll see them exchange that or a different kind of,
That's a great idea.
cake pops or whatever. So they, or sometimes they can just pick the flavor that they want. Or sometimes they can pick the flowers that they want or candle scent that they want. They may like, Melissa gifted you this, and there's ocean breeze and there's this, and they get to actually be interactive and have fun with it. So a lot about that, right, that we went into. But so and the thing about it is, I've had my friends turn around and gift me right back, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, I was gifting you, something. But it's very sweet. So yeah, there are those ways. So then there's the gift. The obvious gift we all know about is our gift of time and giving. Because for me personally, I personally think in this world today, the thing that I am most grateful for is the gift of time. You are giving me your time today, Kendra. And there's so many things. People who are listening to your podcast give of their time. And I just feel like time is so precious. So whether we are giving of our time to encourage other people or just offer something to them, or they are giving of their time to listen or be with us and sit on our side for a moment and engage, I think that is an amazing gift. So there's that. There's also the giving to yourself. And I love this so much because when I really started doing this, I really talk about that healing process and taking care of ourselves in a way and being gentle with ourselves. Say today, for whatever reason, you hang up and there's something stressful that happens with the family or one of the kids or whatever. We just kind of go through our day and we're just like, oh gosh, and we do that. But something we probably don't stop and think about is replenishing. And the ways that I would find to replenish could be as simple as a bubble bath. You know what? I'm going to close the door for 10 minutes and I'm going to replenish. I'm going to give to me. I'm going to take a bubble bath. I'm going to take 10 or 15 minutes and I'm going to polish my nails. I'm going to read for 15 minutes. I'm going to grab one of my favorite books. Give back to yourself when something has been taken from you during the day. I really can't tell you how powerful that is. And so, in the act of giving, we have to remember that a lot of that is giving to ourselves as well. We can be so filled up by giving to other people, but we have to balance that. We have to balance that. So, I talk about that in my book as well.
So beautiful. When you said that, that give something to yourself when something has been taken away, that just kind of like got me,
Yeah.
because those are the times in which maybe we feel like the lowest sometimes, right? As we're starting to feel drained and drained and drained. And it's so easy to keep going down that spiral, downhill when something's going not the way we want it to go. So giving to ourselves just kind of puts a little bit of fuel onto the fire to kind of keep
Well,
you
yeah, I
alive.
mean, because we might kind of throw our hands up in the air and just kind of resolve in our minds that, oh, today's just been, an awful day. But think about that again. That is a choice, that we're making. You know what? There are parts of today that kind of sucked, but let's go for a bike ride. Let's
Mhm.
let's do these things. Let's make these decisions. Let's talk about our highs and our lows, but let's not just say, well, it was all low type of
Mhm.
thing. So,
Oh,
so
that is a wonderful, wonderful tip. And how you worded it was just perfect, as an author would, as an author and a songwriter. So let's talk about songwriting. How do you use your stories of your own life, and how does songwriting end up being part of that process of even healing as well? And then how did you create rhyme partners? I throw too many questions all at
that's
once.
okay. That's okay. Um, Well, one of the wonderful things that I love about being a songwriter is getting in a room with an artist and trying to kind of help them articulate what they want to say and tell a story that's fun and personal but universal to the world. But an added bonus to being a songwriter is being able to come home at the end of the day, sit on my couch, and maybe just kind of sort out something that I've been going through for myself personally, whether it ever sees the light of day out there to the world, or, I end up sharing it at a show. Because there's a difference between being a performing songwriter, as I am,
Mm,
and being an artist. An artist is someone that goes out and has, wants to perform, in front of 30,000 people, whereas a performing songwriter is someone who wants to be part of those songs that artist cuts and puts out to the world, but also is able to share their own, he or she's own music along with those songs in a different setting or situation. And Nashville is perfect for that. There are shows every night of the week. I imagine in Vegas, there's a slot machine in every bathroom there. In Nashville, there's a show in every hotel and every venue, and it's filled with stories and songs and sharing those moments. And so it is fascinating. If you've ever been to Nashville, then and you've been to these music rooms,
mhm,
you get to hear songs and stories that you may never hear on the radio. But at the same time, with today's technology the way it is today, and having streaming outlets and YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and the ability to be expressive, more and more songwriters are getting songs out there that you would otherwise never get to hear. So I love that process so much. And so I'm just like everyone else, I could have something happen in my life and I want to talk about it, or I might reflect on something that happened in earlier years and I'm just ready for that song to tell that story now. That's the thing about songs is I was had a friend the other day who was talking about getting her first number one on a song she wrote 9 years ago. So what does that mean? That means she had a number one song 9 years ago that nobody knew about. So
Mm.
songs, just like everything else in life, they just have their way of finding their time. Sometimes they're a little premature. Sometimes they come along, where you're like, no, that would have worked really well in the early 2000s, but now it's just an exercise. Okay, file it in the list of all the songs. But 9 times out of 10, when I share songs in situations like in Nashville at the Listening Room Cafe or the Bluebird Cafe, wherever I'm at, and there's people in the audience, 9 times out of 10, somebody will come up to me and say, oh gosh, I went through that. And they want to tell me their story. And I love that, because that's the validation that the things that I'm writing about are universal, or that we've all gone through them. And that's the power of music. And so I knew that once I finally got out to Nashville, that I wanted that music was going to be my thing. And I knew that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I was trying to figure out, how do I create a space where it's up to me and nobody can fire me or tell me, I have to go home, or a lot of what I'm doing is writing on someone else. And so I decided to create Rhyme Partners Music Publishing. And honestly, it's been a journey. It's been tough, but it's been worth it. I learned a lot. There were a lot of things that I just dove into, and owning a publishing company that I was clueless about. And at times I had to work backwards with my little company. But here I am today, still valid, still thriving more than ever, and knowing that I get to do music as long as I want to. So created a music publishing company where we have catalogs of songs that we have written over the years until we have a lot of them. And we pitch them to various things. And we've had success with brands and writing commercial radio jingles. And we've had success with some of our songs being on Netflix and TV and film. We've had songs cut by indie artists, by major artists. We've worked with, you name it. We've had hundreds of cuts, and it's really neat. But I also expanded into working with artists. All of this experience and relationship and connections under my belt, I can now help them get to the next place in their career. We do artist development as well. So we just stay busy. It's a lot of fun.
Wow. It's almost been 10 years since you launched it, 2013.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. So that's hard to believe that it's been that long, but yes, Rhyme Partners is almost 10 years old.
10 years
And
old.
yeah,
That's wonderful. And then the part of also then helping coaching pretty much an artist and
yes,
guiding them through the next steps. That's wonderful, especially because you, as you said, you started quote unquote late, as later, right? As when you moved to Nashville, which is really not, right? But we have these, you
yes.
should have already made it by this age or whatever. You have your own journey that you've already taken. So why not pay it forward and help somebody else that's also in that journey? And
Well,
that's another way
I
of giving.
yeah, and I say that with every new song I write, I grow into myself, and I don't expect that to ever change. I'm continuing to grow, as a writer, and still get very excited about my songs and their placements and my company and the success that we have, and branching into writing these books now and being part of that, and being able to speak and show up and do things is all part of just the expansion, which is really, really neat. So in that, the relationships that I've cultivated and the things that I've learned, if I can cut 5 years off of that process for you, well, then that's beneficial, right?
You mentioned books because you've been on other books. This is one of the books you've written is God, Gratitude, and Giving, but you've written chapters in some other books as well. Do you want to mention those? Aside the Cinderella one, what is it called again? Cinderella
So this
monologues that will come out.
That'll come out later in the fall, but I'm actually a part of a really exciting project right now that I partnered on with Dr. Sarah Allen. She's a neuropsychologist, so she's a brain gal. We partnered on a book called The Musical Imprint, and that's actually coming out in September. That's actually will be released on September 13th. And we have 22 authors along with the two of us in this book. And each author wrote a chapter, and basically, the essence of the musical imprint is that each chapter is about a song that marked a moment in someone's life, that every time they hear that song, they go right back to that time, right back to that memory. Because we really wanted to, we know there's lots of books out there on the effects of music on the brain, but we actually wanted to share these stories. And so the book is incredible. Some of the stories and some of the songs, you will recognize some of these songs as timeless songs that we all know. And some of them you may not know, but you'll be very intrigued by the story and want to go listen to the song. So that has been a labor of love, and that has been a process, but we're so excited about that. It's called The Musical Imprint, and it's myself and Dr. Sarah Allen, and that comes out on September 13th. So I have that coming out, and then later in the fall, I have a chapter I contributed to, the Cinderella monologues, and my chapter is We Were 12, and that's all about myself and my husband. So I'm really excited about that I finally get to tell that
Your story.
that story. Yeah, our love story. I get to tell it there. But backing all the way up, a couple of years ago, I was a part of Everyday Woman, um, a guide to doing what you love, and then Everyday Woman's Guide to Success in Your Business. And I contributed chapters, and I found that to be highly beneficial as my introduction into the whole book world. Kind of got my feet wet. I was a part of something. I wasn't at the helm of it. So that was kind of refreshing. So I really say to anybody who is thinking about wanting to get into authorship at some point, that if you have an opportunity to be part of an anthology, it is a great way to kind of tiptoe into the book world. So yes, those, and everything's available on my website. You can get autographed copies from me. You just order it from my website or on Amazon. And then the musical imprint and the Cinderella monologues, that'll all be out soon.
And those will also be available on your website as well when
Yes.
they come out.
Yeah.
So your website will be linked in the bio below
Thank
so that
you.
people can read and go straight to your website to order, and more proceeds will go to you that way, right? If it goes straight
We
to
do.
your,
You.
and you get an autographed copy. So
Yes.
that's a big bonus there. That is wonderful. Anything you want to share with the listeners before we close off? Anything I did not ask?
I think you were wonderful and asked a lot of questions. So I really can't think of anything that we didn't touch on. I would say to your listeners that anybody who's there's you can contact me on my website. There's my email address, or just rhymepartners@gmail.com. One of the things that, on top of creating music and being creative and expressing myself, is just I love to be encouraging, because from where I've come from to where I am, I know what's possible. I remember one time in prayer with God saying, I had been talking to a young lady who had been struggling, and I was trying to encourage her about how, she could really accomplish her dreams. And I remember later going into prayer saying, gosh, I never want to give any type of false hope to anybody. And I remember him laying on my heart right on that moment that you only give the tiniest smidgen of what I can do. So you never have to worry that you're giving too much encouragement or hope. And I received that. I was like, oh yeah, there's a great big world out there. So it was kind of like a little giggle on my side. It was like as if God laughs at somebody. He's kind of laughing, going, I got you. You don't have to worry about it. So say all that to say, I love to encourage. So reach out, encourage you any way that I can.
Well, just even with this podcast, the beautiful nuggets that you gave were encouraging for people that are going through hard times, as well as for artists as well, hearing your story. So thank you once again, Melissa, for sharing of your time, for giving of your time as well, for
Thank
being
you
in this
so
space.
much. Thank you,
Thank
Kendra.
you. Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, If you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.